I'm Eliana Rivera, 26, a freelance illustrator and the quiet niece no one ever really looked at twice. The banquet hall pulsed with chatter and glinting glasses as I stood just outside the open archway, one hand on the strap of my purse, the other fidgeting with the zipper. I could see the whole family spread out inside rows of white-clothed tables under gold chandeliers, floral arrangements wilting slightly under the weight of the June heat. It was my cousin Rachel's engagement party. Everyone I knew and barely knew was their second cousins, in-laws, high school best friends of uncles I hadn't spoken to since I was a kid. But me, I wasn't even on the guest list. Hi. My name's Eliana Rivera. I think I'm supposed to be with the Rivera family, I said to the young woman holding the guest clipboard. She wore a headset and a polite but hurried smile, the kind that says, I'd rather be anywhere else. She scanned the paper. Eliana. Could it be under another name? Rivera doesn't show an Eliana. My throat clenched. It wouldn't be under another name. I'm their niece. My aunt is Teresa Rivera. She's the groom's mom. The girl glanced up, face suddenly uncomfortable. I'll ask one of the organizers. I took a step back, close to the wall, away from the entrance. Heat crept into my cheeks as the girl disappeared through the crowd. I watched my relatives laughing, sipping champagne, clinking forks on china. No one looked toward the archway. No one noticed me. I was about to turn and leave, not dramatically, just quietly, the way I always did when a voice rang out behind me. Eliana, I turned. Aunt Teresa was walking toward me in a pastel dress that glittered faintly at the neckline, her perfectly curled bob bouncing with each step. She looked me up and down and didn't smile. Oh, sweetheart, I didn't realize you were coming. Did someone invite you? I thought it was open to family, I said, trying to sound casual. She laughed lightly but not kindly. Family. Yes, of course. We just weren't sure where you belonged, you know, with your background and all. I blinked. What background? And then, as if she couldn't help herself, as if it was bubbling under the surface all along, she tilted her head and said loud enough for the nearby table to hear, Well, darling, you do know you're adopted. It's not a secret anymore. I stared at her. Everything in the room seemed to stop, the ice clinking, the servers moving, even the low jazz piano tinkling in the back. Her words hung there like a slap in the air. Behind her, people shifted. A few heads turned. I could feel it, the curiosity, the polite discomfort. I'm not adopted, I said, softly but clearly. Aunt Teresa's mouth twitched. Honey, we don't blame you for not knowing, but it's better to be honest than to live under illusions. That was when the doors to the venue opened again, not behind me, but on the other side of the room, where a tall man in a navy suit entered. He held something in his hand. Eliana Rivera, he called out. Loud, clear. I turned. Yes. He approached with confident strides, cutting through the tables like a lawyer about to present Exhibit A. I was sent to deliver something directly to you, per your request last month. Officially cleared. He handed me a flat, sealed envelope with a gold government stamp on the edge. The room was quiet now. Someone even paused mid-toast. I opened the seal with shaking fingers and pulled out the document inside. Would you like to read it aloud? The man asked. Eyes kind but sharp. I didn't hesitate. My voice trembled. But I read the line that mattered most. This is to certify that Eliana Marie Rivera, born July 14, 1998, is the biological daughter of Daniel Rivera and Lucia Rivera, as recorded in the official registry of births for Kings County, New York. Dead silence. Aunt Teresa's hand twitched, clutching her purse strap. My uncle, who had been sipping champagne in the background, lowered his glass. A cousin dropped her phone. I looked up. The crowd was stunned. And for the first time in my life, they were the ones who didn't know what to say. If you've ever felt like a ghost in your own family, or been told you didn't belong in front of strangers, comment below. Let me know where you're watching this from. And if you've ever had to prove your own worth just to be seen, hit the like button and subscribe. I promise, this story only gets deeper from here. That moment, standing in that golden-lit hall with the document in my hand and every eye finally on me, not with dismissal, but confusion, even awe. I felt something shift, and I wasn't going anywhere. Aunt Teresa's face didn't move at first. Her lips stayed tight, and her eyes held that same distant, controlled politeness. But I could see it, the flush climbing her neck, the twitch in her fingers as if she wanted to grab the paper from my hands and tear it to pieces. "Well," she said, too brightly, "I suppose there's always clerical mistakes in paperwork. These things happen, especially with older records." I folded the document calmly, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it into my purse. It's a certified copy, dated last month, straight from Kings County. I called, verified. Twice. Her smile tightened. "You didn't need to go to such trouble, darling." "I did," I said, "because I've spent 26 years wondering why I always felt like a visitor in my own bloodline." From across the room, Uncle Daniel, my father's youngest brother, rose slowly from his chair. His suit jacket hung open, and his tie was loosened, as though the evening had worn him down already. He looked at me the way a man does when seeing someone he owes something to. "Eliana," he said carefully, "no one here meant to hurt you. Maybe things weren't clear growing up, but that doesn't mean there was any malice." I wanted to believe him. He was the only adult I remembered being kind to me when I was small. He used to sneak me lemon squares from the dessert tray during family dinners when no one else noticed I hadn't eaten. But kindness, quiet and unspoken, does not always balance out public betrayal. It's not the forgetting, I said. It's the pretending I was never really one of you. The jazz resumed in the corner, but lower now, as if the pianist sensed the weight in the air. Conversations picked up again in murmurs. I could feel their eyes still tracing me as I stepped deeper into the room. I wasn't escorted out. No one dared. Instead, I found a table near the back where no one was sitting, cloth napkin folded untouched, 2 flutes of untouched champagne still fizzing. I sat, alone, but not invisible. About 20 minutes passed before someone else came to the table. It was a girl about my age. Long auburn hair, a silver nose ring, and a sleeveless navy jumpsuit that defied the pastel dress code. "You don't know me," she said, sitting across from me. "I'm Laura. I'm one of Rachel's college friends." That was... She paused, then smiled. "The most badass thing I've seen all year." I exhaled a laugh, sudden and involuntary. "Thanks. Seriously," she said, leaning forward. "You made every other guest here look like white noise. Who even says stuff like that to someone in public?" "My aunt," I said. "Apparently." Lara shrugged. "Well, they just made you the most interesting person at this party." She stayed with me for a while. We talked about books, design, the absurdity of catering menus. And halfway through, she pulled a small camera from her purse and snapped a candid photo of me without asking. "For your records." She grinned. "In case you ever need to prove you exist again." It was the first time all night I felt warm. Still, as the evening moved on, I kept catching pieces of glances from relatives at other tables, tilted heads, whispers behind glasses, a few frowns when I met their eyes. They weren't angry, just uncomfortable. I had ruptured the script. I wasn't supposed to speak. That's when my father arrived. I hadn't expected him. He walked in wearing an old navy blazer, one hand combing back his graying hair, the other holding a wrapped gift. The moment he entered, Aunt Teresa froze mid-conversation. He spotted me instantly. "Eliana," he said, coming straight to my table. "Dad, I got here as soon as I could. Your message didn't say much, just that I'd want to be present. I didn't know if you would come." He set the gift down on the table and sat beside me. I almost didn't. I wasn't sure I deserved to be here. That stopped me. "Why would you say that?" "Because I let them treat you like someone borrowed, like someone they could send back if she made too much noise." I stared at him. For a moment, I couldn't speak. He continued. "When your mother died, they said you should be raised quietly. That grief made things delicate." I agreed. "I thought I was protecting you. But maybe I was just hiding from how much you reminded me of her." I swallowed hard. My mother had died in childbirth. It was the one thing everyone could agree on. "I never told you," he said, "because they told me you'd be happier not knowing. That maybe if you grew up thinking you came from elsewhere, you'd never notice how little space they gave you at the table." I took a breath. "They told people I was adopted." He nodded slowly, and I let them. We sat in silence. For once, it was the kind that holds you rather than punishes you. Finally, he placed the gift in my hands. "I brought this. Not for Rachel. For you. It's the last thing your mother touched. I found it when I was cleaning the attic last spring. I kept waiting for the right moment." I unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a thin, leather-bound sketchbook. The pages yellowed at the edges. I flipped through them gently. Drawings. All of me. As a baby. As a toddler. As a 5-year-old in a blue dress. "Your mother drew every day she was pregnant," he said. "Said she wanted to know you before the world could tell you who you were." I didn't cry. Not then. Not in front of them. But something inside me settled. A piece I didn't know was jagged found its place. Lara watched quietly from across the table. "You gonna stay a little longer?" she asked. I looked up at my father. He nodded. "Yes," I said. "I think I will." The rest of the party blurred into a slow thrum of glasses, speeches, and polite applause. I didn't get up to join the dance floor. I didn't need to. Just sitting there with the sketchbook in my lap felt like reclaiming something more real than any toast or bouquet toss could offer. My father stayed beside me the whole time. Sometimes we spoke in whispers. Sometimes we didn't speak at all. When a waiter passed by with a tray of desserts, he quietly grabbed the one with lemon curd and slid it toward me with a smile that said, "I remember." Eventually, though, people began to notice our table again. Or more specifically, me, Rachel, the bride-to-be, made her way over just as the DJ was switching to something slower and older, probably for the benefit of the grandparents. She wore a seafoam gown with a slit up one side and carried a champagne flute like it was part of her arm. "Eliana," she said, voice light, eyes sharp. "So glad you made it after all." I stood, partly to meet her, but mostly to prevent the strange power dynamic of sitting while she loomed. "Thanks," I said, keeping my tone neutral. I was surprised to hear, well, what Aunt Teresa said. Rachel went on. "You know how family stories can twist around, right?" "Which part surprised you?" I asked. "That someone thought I was adopted, or that I wasn't?" Rachel paused, smoothing the side of her dress with her free hand. "It's just weird, I guess. I mean, no one really knew where you came from. You were always just there at holidays, drawing quietly in the corner. I used to think maybe you were the housekeeper's kid. Honestly." I smiled faintly, the way one does when pain becomes a quiet, familiar room. "Nope. I was always one of you. Just not treated like it." "Not." Rachel didn't flinch, which impressed me. She had her mother's social armor. "Well," she said finally, "welcome back." Or, "Welcome officially." I don't know what to say. Really, you don't have to say anything, I replied. Just don't pretend I wasn't here. She blinked once. Then, oddly, she offered her hand. I shook it, and she turned and walked back toward her fiancé, some Wall Street type in a tailored vest who hadn't glanced my way once all night. It was enough. Not forgiveness, not warmth, but acknowledgement. Sometimes, that's the door you have to pry open before anything else, after the speech is ended. The DJ lowered the volume and made an announcement for family photos near the flower wall. People shuffled into a loose crowd. I didn't move. I wasn't sure if I should. Then I saw him, Uncle Hector, my dad's older brother, tall, silver-haired, with a stiff gait from an old knee injury. He stood near the flower wall with his wife, her heels sinking into the lawn outside the patio area. "Eliana," he called, waving a hand. "You coming or what?" I hesitated. "Your blood. Aren't you?" he said louder. "You go in the photo." Heads turned, not in disapproval this time, but in recalibration, like the group suddenly had to rearrange its mental blueprint. I walked toward the flower wall, still holding the sketchbook under one arm. My father followed. No one objected. The photographer waved me into the third row, near the cousins. Aunt Teresa stood off to the side, lips tight, her arm looped through her husband's, who looked determinedly elsewhere. I didn't smile in the photo, but I didn't hide either. When it was done, and people began peeling away to gather their coats or refill drinks, I wandered into the garden behind the venue. It was quieter, laced with fairy lights and the faint scent of hydrangeas. I needed space. That's when someone else found me. "Hey," said a voice I hadn't heard in over a decade. I turned. It was Ava, my cousin from out west. We were close once, years ago. Summer trips, shared secrets, drawings passed under tables. She was taller now, her hair cropped short. A ring on her middle finger I instantly recognized as the one she used to steal from her mom's drawer when we played dress-up. "You remember that time we built a tent out of broomsticks and bedsheets?" she asked. "In the backyard at Grandma's," I said. "It collapsed every 10 minutes. But we kept fixing it." Ava smiled. "You cried when Teresa threw it away." "I was 9, I said. "She told me tents were for kids who didn't have real homes." "I'm sorry," Ava whispered. "I heard what she said earlier. I didn't. I never believed it. But I never stood up either. I was just a kid. We all were." I leaned against the garden railing. "I don't blame you." She looked away for a moment. "My mom, your aunt. She always hated anything that reminded her that not everyone needed her approval to be whole." I nodded. "You were always different," she added, "but not in the way they made it seem. You were just fully yourself." I was jealous of that. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves. "I kept your letters," I said. "All those cards you sent before you moved." She looked surprised. "You did in a shoebox." "Still have them." Ava hesitated. Maybe we could start again." It wasn't a promise, just an opening, but I took it. We walked back to the venue together, saying nothing, just breathing in the same quiet night air. When we got to the exit, she turned to me. "I hope next time we see each other, it's not because of someone else's event. Maybe we make our own." I nodded. "Deal." Inside, the crowd was thinning. Laughter now had a softer edge, no longer cutting, just right. Before leaving, I stopped by the table. My purse, the envelope, the sketchbook all there. I took one last glance at the chandelier light catching on the champagne flutes. I had been here, fully, visibly, and they all knew it now. The next morning, the house felt quieter than usual. I was staying in my childhood room at my dad's apartment for the weekend sparse. The posters gone, the corners full of silence instead of books and colored pencils. The sketchbook still sat on the nightstand beside the lamp, waiting like it had more to say. Down the hall, I heard the gentle clink of porcelain. My father was making tea. I padded into the kitchen barefoot, pulled one of the stools out, and sat. Earl Grey or green? He asked without turning. Green, I replied. Always green. He smiled faintly at the memory and handed me a mug with steam curling like a soft ribbon into the air. He didn't speak right away. Neither did I. The sunlight made everything feel strangely clean, like the world had reset overnight. I kept it all, he finally said, nodding toward the sketchbook I'd brought with me from the party, the drawings, her letters, even the receipt from the hospital the day you were born. I took a sip. Why didn't you ever show me? I was afraid it would open more pain than healing. You were so quiet, so self-sufficient. I thought maybe you didn't need answers. I needed a story, I said softly. Something to belong to, even if it wasn't perfect. He nodded slowly, like each motion cost something. I'm sorry I let them make you feel like a question, he said. I blinked hard. That was all I ever wanted. Really, not a dramatic apology, not a sudden embrace, just someone to name the truth. Out loud. I turned the page of the sketchbook, letting my finger rest on the corner of a charcoal sketch, a small girl with curls standing beside a window. One foot up on the sill like she might jump or fly. She drew this the day before she died. My father said it looked like you were looking for the way back into the stars. I didn't respond. The words sat in my chest like a secret I hadn't known I needed. We sat in silence for a while, drinking our tea. The distant sound of traffic bleeding through the open kitchen window. It was the most honest morning I'd had with him since I was 12. Later that afternoon, I left the apartment and took the subway downtown. I had someone else to see. The address belonged to my grandmother, my mother's mother, who I hadn't spoken to in nearly 8 years. Not because of a fight, but because somewhere along the family lines, the Rivera side had quietly erased her too. Her apartment was on the 4th floor, a walk-up in a building that smelled faintly of old books and overwatered plants. I knocked twice, waited, and was about to leave when the door opened. She stood there in a soft mauve cardigan, silver hair braided into a bun, her face pale but watchful. Her expression didn't change at first. Just a long, measuring look. Eliana, she said finally. You came. I wasn't sure you'd remember me. Of course I do. You look just like her. I didn't know if she meant it as a blessing or a burden, but I stepped inside anyway. The apartment hadn't changed. The same teacup collection along the shelves, the framed black and white photographs along the hallway, the slightly slanted floorboard near the kitchen that creaked when you stepped on it. She sat me down in the living room and poured tea into cups that looked like museum pieces. We didn't speak for a while. It was strange, how comfort can live inside silence when it's shared. You want to know about her, she said, not asking. Lucia. I nodded. She was bright. Not the kind of bright that wanted to be seen, though she had an internal light. She laughed with her whole chest, loved art, hated rain, always forgot her umbrella on purpose, so someone would offer her theirs. My throat tightened. She married Daniel young, my grandmother continued. Too young, if you ask me, but she believed in love the way a painter believes in color. Fiercely, naively. Did she know, I asked, that the family didn't accept her? She knew. She just didn't care. She thought time would soften them. Did it? She looked at me, And for a moment, her eyes filled. Not before she died, but you. You're the softening she never got to see. I sat very still. She made that sketchbook for you. My grandmother said. She used to whisper to your belly, saying, "You'll know me, even if I don't stay long." It hit me then, like a tide. Not grief, exactly, but the shape of love I'd never gotten to hold. I stayed there for hours. She brought out old letters, photos, even a blue scarf that had once been my mother's, still faintly smelling of lavender. When I finally left, the sky was beginning to fall into gold. I held the scarf tightly in my hand the whole ride home. That evening, I sat at the desk in my father's apartment and pulled out a clean sheet of paper. For the first time in years, I started to draw not for clients, not for pay, but just for me. I drew a girl standing beneath a family tree, but all the branches were missing names. She stood with a paintbrush, writing them back in. And at the base, for the first time, I wrote my own name in bold. Eliana Marie Rivera. No footnotes, no asterisk, no disclaimer. Just me. Later that night, I posted a photo of the drawing on my social media with a quiet caption, "Belonging isn't given. Sometimes you have to grow it from scratch." Within an hour, messages flooded in, some from strangers who said they'd been the black sheep of their family too, some from old classmates, and one from Ava. "Let's rebuild that tent someday," she wrote. "No broomsticks this time, just us." I smiled. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't rebuilding something broken. I was building something new. My name wasn't just a formality anymore. It was a declaration. 2 weeks later, a cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in dark blue ink, delicate and precise. I turned it over twice before opening it. Inside was an invitation family brunch, hosted by Teresa and Victor Rivera. Sunday at 11 a.m. RSVP encouraged. I almost laughed. But instead, I laid the card flat on the kitchen table and stared at it for a full 10 minutes. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I knew exactly what this was. Not an apology. Not a welcome. A performance. An attempt to stitch the rift without addressing the tear. I waited 3 days before replying. When I finally clicked yes on the RSVP link, it felt like entering enemy territory with my chin lifted and my hands unclenched. On Sunday, I arrived 10 minutes early. Their house hadn't changed much, an elegant beige facade, twin lion statues at the base of the stairs, a fountain that never quite worked right. The garden had been trimmed for the occasion, all the hedges tight like they were afraid of being judged. I rang the doorbell. A maid I didn't recognize opened the door and led me inside. The scent of pastries and citrus wafted through the halls. Classical music played faintly in the background. And then, just like that, I was standing in the same living room where, years ago, I had been sent to the kitchen during adult conversations with nothing but a coloring book and the smell of other people's laughter. They were all there. Rachel and her fiancé, Uncle Hector and his wife, 2 cousins whose names I always got wrong, even Ava, standing by the window with a coffee mug and a cardigan too large for summer. And at the center, seated like she was holding court, was Aunt Teresa. "Eliana," she said, rising from her seat. "How lovely of you to come." She kissed both my cheeks, air only, then gestured to the seat directly across from hers. "You look refreshed," she added. "I suppose standing up for yourself does that," I replied. The silence that followed was sharp but brief. The room adjusted. Small talk buzzed again. Someone passed around scones. I nodded politely, declined champagne, and instead took a glass of orange juice and held it like a shield. For the next 20 minutes, I listened. Teresa updated everyone on her charity gala. Rachel talked about wedding venues. One of the cousins mentioned a promotion in finance. Through it all, I felt eyes drift to me like satellites searching for gravity. Then came the question. So, Aunt Teresa said, sipping her tea with a measured pause, what is it exactly that you do now? Eliana? I mean, aside from drawing, I illustrate professionally. I said, book covers, editorial spreads, private commissions? She raised an eyebrow. So, like freelance? Yes. And published. One of my covers was nominated last month for a National Design Award. Rachel tilted her head. Which book I named it? Her fiancé, who had barely acknowledged me at the party, suddenly turned. That was yours. I nodded. That's been trending for weeks, he said. My firm's media team bought 10 copies for the launch event. The design was the talk of the room. Aunt Teresa blinked. Oh, that "oh" was small, but it rang like a bell in the air. She looked like someone who had been handed a mirror without warning. So, I said gently, I guess you could say I'm not just drawing quietly in corners anymore. A few people laughed. Real laughter. Not nervous or mocking, just surprised. Ava smirked behind her coffee mug. It wasn't revenge. I didn't want revenge. But in that moment, I felt my seat at the table anchor itself a little more solidly. After brunch, as people began trickling out into the garden or gathering coats, Aunt Teresa approached me again. She didn't smile this time. Her expression was measured, delicate. I owe you an apology, she said. I waited. I didn't rush to accept it. I wanted to hear the whole shape of it first. I said things I shouldn't have, she continued. In front of people, I embarrassed you. You erased me. I said plainly. Not just in that room, but before. For years. She nodded slowly, her mouth a tight line. I wanted to protect the family image. I thought. The fewer questions people asked, the easier it would be to maintain peace. You mean control? I corrected. There was no hostility in my voice, just truth. She flinched anyway. I know, she said quietly, and I know it's too late to undo everything. Maybe, I replied, but it's not too late to stop repeating it. She nodded again, and for the first time in my life, I saw something behind her eyes that wasn't arrogance or coldness. It was fatigue, the tiredness of someone who had spent her whole life guarding an illusion. I hope you'll come to the wedding, she added. Rachel wants you there. I think. We both do. I'll think about it, I said. If I come, it'll be as myself. No whispering, no disclaimers. That's fair. Before leaving, Ava caught up to me on the porch. You handled that like a queen, she said. I handled it like someone who's tired of playing pretend. She linked her arm through mine. Either way, I'm proud of you. We walked down the driveway together in silence. At the end, I turned left. She turned right. No promises, no pressure, just the feeling that maybe we weren't on opposite sides anymore. Back home, I opened my inbox and saw a new message from a publishing agency. They wanted to feature a profile on me, my journey, my work. I hesitated. For so long, my story had been shaped by absence, what wasn't said, what was assumed, what was erased. But now I could write it myself. I replied with one line, I'm ready to tell it on my terms. Later that night, I pulled out the sketchbook again. On the last blank page, I drew a table, a long wooden table under an open sky. At the head was a woman in a soft cardigan, smiling quietly. Around her, people of every kind, some familiar, some unknown, but all holding something precious in their hands. And at the center of the table sat a girl with her hand raised, pen in hand, rewriting the names carved into the wood. Not out of anger, out of clarity, out of truth. This was no longer about proving I belonged. It was about choosing what I belonged to. The article came out the following Friday. My inbox exploded within hours. Editors, old friends, strangers from all over the country. The title was bold and simple. Not the adopted one. The artist who reclaimed her name. They had printed one of my sketches across the spread, a charcoal drawing of a little girl standing at the edge of a crowd, her hands full of roots. The piece was raw and honest, and I hadn't expected them to use it, but I was glad they did. That weekend, I took a train north to a small lake cabin I hadn't visited since childhood. It belonged to my mother's side of the family, and after her death, it had quietly become forgotten. My grandmother had offered me the keys during our last tea together, almost as an afterthought. Go see it, she'd said. See what she left behind. The train ride was quiet and slow, the kind of pace that lets your thoughts catch up with you. I watched the landscape change, city grays dissolving into green hills, distant barns, lone trees leaning under their own weight. When I arrived, the air smelled different: damp earth, pine, something faintly metallic. The cabin sat nestled between two silver birch trees. Paint faded, roof moss softened, but the door still opened without resistance. Inside, it was a time capsule. The furniture was draped in sheets, and dust floated through sunbeams like soft snow. I peeled back the covers slowly, each one revealing some piece of history. A hand-woven rug, a brass lamp with fingerprints frozen in time, a bookshelf half collapsed under the weight of forgotten novels. And then, in the far corner, her desk. Small, scratched, covered in old graphite stains and the scent of cedar. I sat there for a long time, just breathing. Then I opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a shoebox tied with a ribbon, faded red, fraying at the corners. I untied it and lifted the lid. Dozens of folded notes, some no larger than playing cards, each one in my mother's handwriting. To Eliana. For when you're older. For when you need to remember who you are. I opened the first. You love water, even if it scares you. You once ran straight into the lake before you could walk properly. I think that's who you are, someone who runs toward what others avoid. I opened another. You'll be quiet, maybe, but never weak. There is power in stillness. I hope no one ever takes that away from you. And another. You're not an afterthought. You're the point. I stopped reading. My hand was shaking. I didn't know how long I sat there. Notes strewn across the desk. The scent of old ink clinging to my fingers. I hadn't cried in years, not in front of people, not in solitude. But now the tears came, not in gasps or sobs, just a steady, quiet rain. Outside, the wind moved through the birches. Leaves whispered against the glass. I felt her there not as a ghost, but as a thread finally pulled through the needle. Later that night, I lit a small fire in the stone hearth and sat with the sketchbook in my lap. I added a new page, a woman sitting at a desk in a cabin. In front of her, the wind painted letters into the air, each one shaped like something alive. And behind her, a girl stood, watching her draw, hands full of roots and ribbons. I labeled it, "Legacy isn't what they say you inherit. It's what you discover was always yours." Back in the city, things had started to change in small, quiet ways. Lara texted me every few days now. Photos of books, random sketches she'd snapped in the subway. Once even a picture of a coffee cup that looked like one I'd drawn years ago. Proof you exist in more places than you think. She'd written. Ava and I met twice for lunch. She brought old photos from her mother's albums, and I brought her a framed print of one of my new pieces, the family tree with missing names. But this time, roots, glowing like veins. I think we're rewriting something, Ava said. We are. I agreed. And then, without fanfare or bitterness, I reached out to Rachel. Not with anger, just a message. I'm not here to rehash what happened, but if you want to know me, really know me, I'm open to it. She responded hours later. Let's start with coffee. No cameras, no fancy brunch. Just you and me. We met at a small cafe near the library. She was quieter than usual, less polished, like she had taken off the armor for once. We didn't talk about Teresa, or the brunch, or the party. We talked about art and grief, and how sisters aren't always born, they're sometimes made through shared loneliness. As we stood to leave, she said, I don't know if I can undo everything I've said about you in the past. I don't need that. I said, I just need the version of you that looks me in the eye. She nodded. Then I'll work on being her. At home. I printed one last copy of my birth certificate and pinned it on the corkboard above my desk, not because I needed the proof anymore, but because sometimes the world makes you carry your truth like armor until you no longer need to fight. I didn't feel erased anymore. I felt etched, and maybe that was better. On the final page of the sketchbook, I wrote a single line. They tried to make me a footnote, but I rewrote the chapter. I closed the book, placed it on the shelf beside my newest project, a children's book about belonging, illustrated entirely in quiet colors and hidden symbols. The protagonist, a girl who finds a map tucked into a shoebox, one that leads her to a place where names can be replanted, and silence has a shape and a voice. The dedication for Lucia, and anyone who's ever had to prove they were real. I didn't need validation from the people who once ignored me. I had drawn myself into the world, and the world had answered back. A month later, I stood in the back corner of a bookstore tucked into a quiet block near Union Square. The walls were lined with shelves that stretched to the ceiling, each packed with well-loved spines and dust that shimmered in the overhead light. A small chalkboard sign near the register read, Tonight author and illustrator, Eliana Rivera, reading and signing at 6 p.m. I hadn't told anyone in the family about the event. It wasn't out of resentment. It was just, this was mine. Not a performance. Not a reparation. Just something I'd built from the cracks they once tried to cover up. I didn't need their presence. I didn't need applause. I needed only the sound of the pages turning, the way the illustrations whispered back like old friends. The crowd was small, but warm parents with their kids. A few old classmates, 3 editors from a children's publishing house, and Lara, seated cross-legged near the front with a little girl on her lap who kept whispering, That's her. She drew the lake I read from the first chapter of The Girl with the Ribbon Roots. I'd written it in pieces over the years, sometimes in cafes, sometimes on the subway, once even sitting on the roof of the cabin. It was the story of a child who wandered through other people's gardens until she finally dug a space of her own and planted names that grew into trees. When I finished reading, the room clapped, soft, respectful. I glanced down at my hands, resting over the final page, and then, at the very back, near the door, I saw her, Aunt Teresa. She wore a tailored navy coat, her hair clipped back, no jewelry, just a plain gold pin at her collar. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't scowling either. She looked still, almost unfinished. She didn't approach during the Q&A. She didn't wave. She stood silently, arms folded, as people lined up to have their books signed. I kept waiting for her to leave, but she didn't. By the time the last child skipped off clutching their copy, the room had mostly emptied. Only Laura and the store owner remained nearby, chatting quietly, and Aunt Teresa. I closed the last book, capped my pen, and walked over to her. "I didn't expect you here," I said. "I wasn't sure I would come," she admitted. "How did you know about it?" "Rachel sent me the article, the profile, and then the book cover. She said she read it 3 times, cried once. I thought she was exaggerating, but she wasn't." I looked down. "It's not about the family." "No," she said. "It's about you." But that's what made it feel like I'd missed something all these years. Like I was watching you through a fog and thought it was your fault for not being clear. I didn't speak. She continued. "I wanted you to think I was strong, that I was in control. But really, I was just terrified of what didn't fit the narrative I built for our family." "Why me?" I asked. "Why was I the piece you kept trying to bend or hide?" Her voice dropped. "Because you reminded me of my sister." I frowned. "Lucia." "Yes," she whispered. "She was everything I couldn't be. Soft, wild, unashamed. She made my mother laugh more than I ever did. When she died, I thought maybe if I erased the memory, I could finally have space to be the daughter I was supposed to be. But then you came, and you looked like her, and you drew like her, and you had that same kind of light, and I hated you for it." The words didn't sting. They landed. Real. Honest. "I'm sorry." "Eliana," she said, eyes glassy but unflinching. "I'm sorry I made you question your place, your name, your worth." I exhaled. Slow and steady. "I stopped needing your permission to exist a long time ago." She nodded. "I know, but I needed to say it anyway." For a moment, we stood there in silence, 2 women holding the weight of a history neither one fully chose. Then she reached into her coat and pulled out a small envelope. "I found this in my desk drawer. I think it's yours." I opened it. Inside was a photograph, yellowed at the edges. It was me, a toddler, sitting on Lucia's lap. She was drawing, and I was gripping the pencil with both hands, grinning, her arms around me like a frame. "I took it," Teresa said, "the day before the hospital. I've kept it buried ever since." I stared at it. My mother, my real mother, looking around, not like a ghost or a story, but like a person, holding me, laughing with me. "Thank you," I whispered. Teresa turned to leave, but then paused at the door. "If you ever write another book, I'd like to buy a copy. Full price. I'll let you know," I said, and I went out. That night, Lara and I sat in the diner across the street, splitting a slice of lemon pie under the flicker of a buzzing neon sign. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. Weirdly. "Yeah. You want to talk about it?" "Not yet," I said. "Right now. I just want to sit here, drink something too sweet, and feel the weight of nothing for a bit." She smiled. Done. We sat in silence, watching raindrops scatter across the window. I looked at my reflection, older now, steadier, but still holding that same question I'd had my whole life. Do I matter? And the answer, for the first time, didn't need to come from someone else. It was yes. Quiet and certain. I mattered. Because I said so. Because I'd lived it. Because I'd drawn the line. And when they tried to erase it, I carved it deeper. And now, there it was. Permanent. The next morning, I woke up with light streaming through the windows and the scent of rain still lingering in the air. I'd fallen asleep on the couch, the lemon pie box still on the table beside me. A folded note from Lara tucked under my phone. "You're not a sketch in the margins anymore. You're the headline. Proud of you. L." I stared at it for a long while. Something about the way she'd written that no embellishments, no emojis made it feel heavier than 100 apologies ever could. Later that day, I got a call from my editor, Eliana. "You're going to want to sit down," she said, laughing breathlessly into the phone. "I'm already sitting. Your book just hit the regional bestseller list. Independent bookstores across 4 states are selling out. We had to order a second print run." I didn't speak. I just smiled, my hand resting on the spine of the sketchbook near my elbow. "That's not all," she continued. "We got a message from a foundation, the Lucia Initiative. They're organizing a visual storytelling program for kids who've been through family displacement. They want to feature your book as part of the curriculum. The Lucia Initiative." I hadn't heard that name used outside of memory. The idea that my mother's name would be passed on not in whispers or regret, but as a symbol of hope, it stunned me. "They want to meet with you next week," the editor said. "Are you open?" "Yes," I said immediately. "I want to know everything." After we hung up, I stood for a while in my small living room, the walls filled with prints and framed covers from the past few years. But the sketchbook my mother's sat alone on a shelf, closed, but humming with presence. I pulled it down and opened it again, flipping through pages until I reached one that had always puzzled me. It was a drawing of a tree, but not a typical one. Its trunk was braided like hair, its branches holding letters instead of leaves. Letters addressed to no one and everyone, drawn in soft graphite lines. Suddenly, I understood. It was me. It was always me. Later that week, I traveled to the Foundation's small headquarters across town. They were housed in a converted library, sunlight streaming in from tall arched windows, the scent of paper and old wood welcoming me like an old memory. A woman named Camilla greeted me at the door. "Eliana Rivera," she said warmly. "You're a living story around here. The kids are obsessed." She led me through the rooms, past sketches taped to the walls and writing prompts posted in neon chalk on blackboards. In the center was a round table where a dozen kids sat, each hunched over their notebooks, pencils moving like they were pulling truth straight from their bones. "They're working on their origin pages," Camilla whispered. "Every child here starts by drawing the moment they first felt invisible." I swallowed. "I'd like to try it," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "Even now, especially now." She brought me a chair and a blank sheet. I sat beside a boy with soft eyes and a frayed hoodie. He looked at me curiously, then nudged his paper toward me. His drawing showed a living room, a couch, a cluster of people with empty ovals where faces should be. In the corner, a small figure stood holding a balloon with the string cut. "That's powerful," I said. "They were all there," he whispered. "But I wasn't really invited. I know that feeling," I said. He stared. "You do?" I nodded. He looked down at my paper. "What are you going to draw?" I thought for a moment, then began. My pencil traced the outline of a dinner table, a long one. Everyone had food, glasses raised, but one chair mine was turned backward, empty. Behind it, a girl stood, holding a piece of paper that glowed like fire. The boy smiled. "That's a good one." "It's true," I said. "But it's not the end." Later, as the session ended and kids filed out with colored folders and laughter bouncing off the high ceilings, Camilla approached me again. "We'd like to make you a visiting artist," she said. "Come once a month. Maybe more. Teach them how to tell their story, even if the world doesn't want to hear it." I'd be honored. As I left the building, the autumn wind caught the edges of my scarf. The streets buzzed with motion cars, voices, dogs barking in the distance, but I walked slowly, savoring each step like it was threaded with new purpose. That night, my father called. "I saw the article," he said, "and the book listing. Your mother would have been so proud." "I hope so. I know so. She would have cried and tried to pitch a version of it to the PTA." I laughed, real and light. He paused. Do you think you'll ever forgive them, Teresa? The others? I don't know, I said. Maybe, but I'm not living in that question anymore. I've moved forward. He was silent a moment. I want to come to your next event, whatever it is. I want to sit in the front row. I'd like that. The following Sunday. I returned to the cabin, alone this time, but not lonely. I opened all the windows, let the wind stir the old curtains, swept the dust from the corners like I was clearing a new canvas. Then I opened a fresh sketchbook mine this time and wrote the title on the first page, Things I Was Never Meant to Forget. The first entry was simple. A girl stands with a match and a document. Behind her, a room full of strangers. In front of her, a path carved from names they tried to take away. She walks forward. The paper burns. She does not. By the window. I pinned up the photo Aunt Teresa had given me. My mother, smiling. Me, laughing. Time paused before the unraveling, and underneath it, I added a note. They said I was adopted. They said I didn't belong. But I looked into the mirror and found my mother's eyes. I opened my palms and saw her lines. I spoke my name, and the world did not shatter. I stood back and stared at the wall, the sketch, the photo, the note. This was no longer a reclamation. This was a foundation. And I was ready to build. Winter came quietly that year. No dramatic snowfall. No thunderous winds, just a steady descent into gray. The streets softened under frost, and the mornings began with breath clouds and coats zipped to the chin. I liked it. The stillness, the calm, the way the world seemed to slow down long enough for people to notice one another. I found myself working more than ever. The cabin had become my second home, and with each visit, I uncovered more of my mother's presence in the smallest things, her handwriting inside a cookbook, her initials etched into a drawer, a pressed wildflower left between the pages of a novel I once saw her holding in a photo. I'd started teaching at the foundation every other Thursday. The kids were sharp, skeptical, funny. One of them, Aiden, had drawn himself as a magician whose magic only worked when no one was watching. When I asked why, he shrugged and said, "That's just how it feels. That's just how it feels." I carried that line with me all week. Then, one morning, I got an email. Subject Family Tree Restoration Project Rivera line. It was from Ava. She'd apparently started working on a digital family archive, gathering documents, photos, scanned letters. She wanted to remap the family tree, this time with full names, real stories, and no erasures. She'd written, "There's a whole history in the shadows, and I think it's time we turn on the lights. Wanna help?" I stared at the message, hesitant at first. And then I replied, "Only if we start with the missing names, the ones no one was allowed to say." She wrote back in under 5 minutes. I was hoping you'd say that. "Let's begin with Lucia." And so we did. Over the next several weeks, I dug through boxes at my father's apartment, scoured the city records office, called distant relatives I barely remembered. Ava worked from the West Coast, scanning photos, digitizing birth certificates, interviewing family friends. Together, we built a story that was finally complete, or at least honest. We included everyone, even the complicated ones. One afternoon, while sifting through a stack of yellowed envelopes in my father's attic, I found a letter. It was addressed to Lucia, dated 2 months before I was born. I unfolded it gently. "Lucia, if something happens to you, if this doesn't go the way we hope, I want you to know that I will raise her the way you wanted. I will show her the world through your eyes. I will never let her believe she came from silence." Daniel, I sat on the floor and cried. Not from sadness, not even from joy, just from the sheer weight of being seen. Finally, even in a time before I could speak. The next time I taught at the foundation, I brought the letter. I didn't read it aloud. I didn't explain its origin. I just showed the kids how you can draw strength from what someone left behind. You don't have to come from perfect. I told them. You just have to come from somewhere real. They nodded. Not all of them understood, but they felt it. That was enough. Then, one snowy evening in January, I received an invitation. It was from Rachel. She and her fiancé were hosting a small family dinner at their new place. No speeches, no performances, just a chance to share a meal. She said Ava would be flying in, that they wanted to show the archive project to everyone. I said yes. Not because I trusted all of them, not because I expected anything, but because I didn't want to hide anymore. The night of the dinner, I wore a simple dark green dress and a necklace my grandmother had given me, a silver pendant in the shape of a paintbrush. The Rivera house was filled with warmth, laughter, the smell of roasted rosemary chicken and candle wax. Rachel greeted me at the door and hugged me like we had grown up on the same staircase. "You look calm," she said. "I am." We sat around a long wooden table. Ava had brought a projector. She loaded up the archive on a screen and began walking us through it. Photo after photo, name after name. Then she paused. "This is the branch that was never finished," she said. "Until now." And there it was. Lucia Rivera, 1972-1998. Artist, mother, sister, wife. Next to her, a line drawn down there. Eliana Rivera, 1998. Illustrator, educator, daughter. Silence fell over the room. Not awkward, not uncomfortable, just respectful. Teresa, seated at the end of the table, looked at the screen with an unreadable expression. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. But she reached for her water glass with a hand that was just barely trembling. I looked around at the faces. Some I knew. Some I'd feared. Some I'd avoided for years. And they looked back at me with something new. Not guilt. Not pity. Recognition. After dinner, Rachel pulled me aside near the kitchen. "I didn't know how much I needed this," she said. "Me neither." She smiled. "Ava said you've been sketching again. Personal stuff." I never stopped. I said, "I just hit it." "Well, don't anymore." Before I left, I gave Ava a framed drawing I'd done just for the archive. A tree, its trunk braided, roots glowing. At the base, a small girl planting a sign that read, "I belong here." Ava smiled. "We'll make it the cover." Outside, the snow had started again. Light. Slow. I pulled on my gloves and walked toward the subway. But halfway down the block, I turned around. Back at the doorway stood Teresa, alone, her coat half-buttoned, her eyes on me. She raised her hand. Just a little. I raised mine in return. Not a wave, not a peace offering, just a quiet acknowledgement. I turned back and kept walking. And this time, I didn't look back again. Spring arrived like an exhale. The snow vanished in patches, leaving behind damp sidewalks and budding trees. New York smelled different wet pavement, flower carts returning to corners, hot pretzels steaming in soft air. I noticed it all more now. Not because my life had slowed, but because I had stopped rushing to prove something. I'd started saying no more often, not out of defiance, but clarity. I no longer took every commission, no longer bent over backward to stay invisible in rooms I didn't need to be in. My inbox still filled daily, but now it was full of the right kind of requests: book clubs wanting visits, students asking how to tell the truth with a pencil, even a gallery curator wondering if I'd consider a solo exhibit. That one I hadn't answered yet. One Sunday morning, as I sat sketching near the window, a message came in from Lara. "Lara got time for a walk. Prospect Park's blooming. The world's looking a little too forgiving. Come ruin it with me." I laughed and texted back, Me. Give me 15 minutes. Meet by the lake bench. We walked for hours. She talked about her new series photos of empty chairs in public spaces, each one symbolizing a presence no longer avoided. She'd called it ghosted, which made me snort. You know, she said, I used to think power was about being loud. It can be, but you taught me it can also be about staying. Staying. She nodded. Staying in the room, in the conversation, in your skin. That's its own kind of volume. I didn't answer. I just smiled, then tossed a pebble into the lake. It bounced once, then sank. Clean. Final. Later that week, Ava called. I found something. What kind of something? Old VHS tapes from Teresa's garage. They're labeled, but poorly. One says, Lucia Winter. Another just says, E. Want to come go through them? I hesitated. Are we sure we want to open that, Eliana? She said, voice calm. You spent years looking for fragments. Now we're finding whole pieces. You deserve to see them. So that Saturday, I boarded a flight to California. Ava picked me up at the airport with a cardboard box already buckled into the back seat like a baby. We drove straight to her apartment, the box between us in silence. When we got there, she cleared a space on her living room floor, pulled out an old VHS player she'd scavenged from a thrift store, and popped in the first tape. The screen crackled, then faded into a grainy image of snow falling in a backyard. A woman's laughter echoed just off screen. And then she appeared. Lucia. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-20s, dressed in a red knit sweater, hair pulled back in a messy bun. She was holding a toddler. Me. I had never seen moving footage of her. Only still frames. This was different. She wasn't frozen. She was alive. Laughing. Spinning me in a circle. I squealed. She sang. The tape cut briefly, then resumed inside the house. She was sketching, and I was scribbling beside her, tongue stuck out in concentration. She's just like me, I whispered. Ava didn't speak. She didn't need to. We watched all 4 tapes, each one a quiet revelation. My first steps, her reading to me in Spanish, us baking, her brushing my hair, a birthday party with Teresa in the background, half in frame, arms crossed. On the last tape, Lucia looked directly into the camera. If you ever wonder where you come from, she said, don't look for permission. Just look for your own voice. It's always been yours. Then she turned back to the sketchpad. The screen went black. I sat there for a long time. Then Ava said, we should digitize these. Share them with the family archive. Not yet. I said, not until I use them to finish something first. Back in New York, I dove into the solo exhibit proposal. I'd been unsure before, but now, it felt right. The title came easily, Inheritance Drawn in Silence. Each piece would be based on these the letters, the memories, charcoal portraits layered over translucent paper, sketches of erased dinner tables, a series of drawings where names reappeared, looming like scars into flowers. There would be no plaques. Instead, a wall of anonymous whispers collected from the kids at the foundation. What's one thing you've never been allowed to say by men? The gallery approved everything. They gave me the opening date, June 14th. My birthday. I smiled when I saw it. Not poetic, not symbolic, just true. In the weeks that followed, people reached out, cousins I hadn't spoken to since I was 12, neighbors who remembered me as that quiet kid with the notebooks. Even Teresa. She sent a letter, typed, I won't ask to come to the exhibit. I'm not sure I've earned that right. But I hope you know I'm rooting for you now. And I see you. Finally. I do. I didn't reply. But I didn't tear the letter up either. The night of the exhibit, The room filled slowly. Friends, colleagues, some strangers. My father stood near the back, holding the first sketchbook like it was sacred. Ava hovered near the projector. Rachel came too. Even Lara, wearing a red scarf and holding 2 wine glasses like it was her job to keep me hydrated and deflect awkward conversations. At exactly 7:06 p.m., the lights dimmed. A video began to play silent clips from the tapes. No music, just image after image. Me and Lucia, a mother and daughter drawing side by side, faces that were never meant to be forgotten. Then the screen faded to white, and I stepped forward. I don't have a speech, I said, just a thank you for being part of something that was once invisible. There was no applause, just a quiet, collective inhale. It was enough. Afterward, I wandered the gallery alone. I stopped in front of a small piece near the far corner, a pencil sketch of a girl standing in a blank field, holding a map made of torn letters. Someone had taped a note beneath it. I saw myself here. Thank you for reminding me I'm not lost. And I thought, maybe that's what this was all for. Not to be seen, but to become a mirror, to show others they existed too, because that, I finally knew, was the deepest kind of belonging. Not being named, but naming yourself and being heard. 2 weeks after the exhibit closed, I found myself sitting on the rooftop of my apartment building, the city lights flickering beneath me like a slow pulse. It was close to midnight. The air was warm and restless, summer creeping into the crevices of every building. I had brought up my sketchbook, a thermos of tea, and a photo of my mother that Ava had scanned and sent in high resolution. I liked to keep it near, not as a relic, but as a reference, not for drawing, for remembering. The exhibition had done more than I expected. It didn't just open doors, it opened people. Strangers wrote letters. Parents sent emails saying they showed their daughters the wall of anonymous confessions. One girl wrote, "I used to think I was just a mistake, but after seeing your drawings, I think maybe I'm a seed." I read that line 4 times in a row. Then I cried. Not because it hurt, but because it echoed. That week, the Lucia Initiative offered to fund a full-year residency for me, a program for teens whose identities had been erased or denied by their families, foster kids, undocumented students, LGBTQ+ youth. They wanted me to build a space where art could rewrite silence into permanence. I said yes before the sentence finished. Then came a call I hadn't expected. "Hi, it's Teresa." I froze. "I know this is unexpected," she said. "I got your number from Ava. She asked permission." I told her it was fine. A pause. "I just wanted to ask if you'd consider coming to the family memorial this year. We're doing it differently. Less ceremony. More space. Rachel's idea. Actually?" I was silent. "She wants to include Lucia this time." Teresa continued, voice tight. "Her name's never been read at the gathering. I think that's overdue." "Yes," I said. My voice surprised me. Clear. Steady. "It is. You don't have to decide now," she added quickly. "I just wanted to ask. That's all." I waited. "When is it?" "Next Sunday." I nodded to myself. "I'll think about it." We hung up. That night, I stayed up sketching, a figure holding a frame with no glass, standing in front of a house where all the windows had been bricked up. But one, just one, had begun to crack open, letting in a sliver of gold. The next day, I called Ava. "I'm thinking of going," I told her. "To the memorial." "Yes, I'll be there," she said. "You won't be alone." Sunday came. The Rivera family memorial was held in the town's old chapel, a place where names were spoken aloud, candles lit, moments held with tight fingers and tighter smiles. I hadn't attended in years, not since I was 14, sitting in the back pew while Teresa read a list of names that never included my mother. But this time, I wore the red scarf, the one Lara gave me at the gallery, a symbol, not of defiance, but of visibility. The chapel was quiet when I arrived. Stone walls and stained glass humming with light. Candles flickered at the altar. A book sat open on a pedestal with lined pages, a single pen resting across it. Ava met me at the door and took my hand without a word. We walked in together. People turned. Some smiled. Some nodded. Teresa stood near the front, her face unreadable, but she didn't flinch. She didn't look away. The ceremony began. Rachel stood to speak. Her voice wavered, but she carried it. She talked about memory, about names that aren't just sounds but stories, about love that outlives permission. Then, at the end, she did what no one had ever done. She lit a candle and said, "Lucia Rivera, daughter, sister, artist, mother. Your name was missing too long. We hold you now." A quiet tremble passed through the room. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, Teresa was already at the pedestal. She picked up the pen, hesitated, and then wrote something in the book. When she stepped away, I walked up and read it. "I remember your laughter. I remember your courage. I wish I'd remembered you sooner." She didn't sign her name. She didn't need to. I wrote my message beside hers. "Your story didn't end in silence. I'm still telling it." Later, outside the chapel, Teresa approached me. "Thank you for coming. I came for her." "I know," she said, "but still, thank you." We stood in silence. "I used to think grief was something you manage," she said. "But I think I confused management with denial." "It's okay," I said. "No," she replied, "but maybe it will be." We parted without a hug, without fanfare, just a nod, like two people finally starting the same chapter. Back home, I sat by the window and drew one last sketch for the archive. A girl holding a mirror. In it, she sees not herself, but a constellation, each star a name that once went unspoken. The caption beneath it, "Inheritance is not just blood. It's the truth we choose to carry." And I was carrying it. All of it. Not as a burden, but as a banner. The night after the memorial, I couldn't sleep. Not out of sadness, something else. Restlessness. A quiet urgency that had settled behind my ribs like a pulse. I stayed in bed for hours with the light off, my eyes open, the city humming beyond the window. At 4:11 a.m., I rose, made tea, sat at my desk with the sketchbook. I turned to a blank page and waited. I didn't know what would come, but something did. A line first, then a shoulder, a hand reaching upward, toward something not pictured. I kept drawing until the sky outside turned a shade lighter and the cup beside me had long gone cold. When it was finished, I looked at the image, a girl standing in a clearing, surrounded by faceless figures. She held a torch in one hand and a birth certificate in the other. Behind her, shadows reached, but none could touch her. Above her head was a single phrase etched in the stars: "I was not forgotten." I was unfinished. I closed the book and exhaled. That morning, I returned to the foundation earlier than usual. Camilla was already there, arranging stools in the circle room, a stack of fresh sketch pads on the center table. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Couldn't not come?" I replied. The kids arrived one by one. They no longer hesitated at the door like they had during the first weeks. Now they entered as if they belonged, which was all I ever wanted for them. We began the session with a new prompt I had written that morning. Draw the moment you stopped needing permission. They all went quiet in that instinctive, sacred way. Pencils scratched, Markers uncapped. I walked around the circle, pausing behind each of them just long enough to witness what was blooming on the page. One drew herself stepping out of a picture frame. Another drew a field of locked doors, each one bursting open with roots instead of keys. A boy drew a mask hanging on a tree branch, left behind like old clothing. When I sat down with my own pad, I didn't draw right away. I just listened. Aiden, the boy with the magician drawing, tapped my elbow. I made you something. He handed me a page. It was a sketch of a teacher holding a mirror. In it, the reflection was not her but all the kids she'd helped, all holding torches. I looked at him, my chest tightening. Aiden, this is beautiful. He shrugged, embarrassed. Just felt right. I kept that drawing. I folded it carefully and slid it into the back cover of my sketchbook. A small flame to carry. That afternoon, I walked to the lake at Prospect Park, the same bench where Lara and I had sat that day. It was empty now, touched by early summer light. I sat down and closed my eyes. For the first time in a long time, I thought about the moment years ago when I first overheard the word adopted, whispered in a hallway like it was shameful. I remembered asking my father what it meant, and him saying, "That's not something you need to worry about." And yet, I had, for years, but not anymore. That word no longer hung over me. It no longer defined me, because I knew now my identity had never been about how I entered the family. It was about how I lived through it. Later that week, I received a letter in the mail, a handwritten envelope, no return address, but I recognized the penmanship. It was from Teresa. Inside, a single-page note. Eliana, I've been thinking about the exhibit, the memorial, your book. I've been thinking about Lucia. I wish I had protected her better. I wish I had protected you better. I know you don't owe me anything, but if one day you have a daughter or a student who reminds you of yourself, I hope she never has to earn her place. I hope she arrives and is simply allowed to be. Teresa. I folded the letter and placed it in the same box where I kept my mother's notes, not as an heirloom, as evidence that people too could change. By the end of summer, Ava and I had completed the full Rivera archive. We decided to launch it publicly not just for the family, but as a template for other families reckoning with forgotten names. At the top of the homepage was a simple line: "This tree has roots no one could see until now." The site went viral in quiet corners of the internet, academic forums, memoir circles, small communities where generational silence had built tall, invisible walls. One woman wrote from Spain, "I showed this to my aunt, and we added back my grandmother's sister. She was erased for marrying outside the church, but not anymore." Another from Canada. "My mother never told me I was adopted. She died last year. Your story helped me forgive her." I stopped keeping track of the messages after a while. I read them all, but I didn't try to hold them too tightly. Each one was a note passed in the dark. I was just the one holding the flashlight. The foundation named the art room after Lucia. I didn't ask for that. Camilla said it just felt right. One morning, as I unlocked the door to that room, I stood in the center and looked around. Sketches on the wall, laughter in the hallway, a floor worn smooth from turning pain into portraits. I pulled out my own pad, sat by the window, and wrote one final caption beneath a new sketch. A girl walks forward, holding two names, hers and the one she came from. The world tries to take one. She keeps them both. I signed it with my full name, Eliana Marie Rivera, and I closed the book. Not because the story was over, but because it no longer needed to be defended. It simply was mine.